be holding our commission meeting. Before we get started, I'll read through a checklist to ensure that the meeting that we are holding is in compliance with the right to know law. As chair of the HB 737 Commission, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04 and its extensions, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. In accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that 1, we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possible by video and other electronic means. We are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the committee and selected legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously in this meeting through this platform. And the public has access to contemporaneously watch and or listen to the meeting on Zoom and via phone by following the directions and links provided on the General Court website. 2, we have provided public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting in the Senate calendar. 3, we are providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are problems with access. If anyone has problems, please email Alan Rath at the Senate office. I don't have your number, Alan. Do you want in your email?
Yep, you can dial 603-271-3043, or you can email remote-senate@ledge.state.nh.us. Again, that's remote-senate@ledge.state.nh.us.
Thank you. 4, in the event the public is unable to access the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. 5, please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. 6, finally, let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state where they are and if anyone else is in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. And Ms. Nikki Forty will call the roll.
Thank you, Representative Rung. Mr. Ayotte?
He's muted.
Sorry, present and by myself in Concord, New Hampshire.
Okay. Mr. Bandazian?
Present at my office in Manchester by myself.
Representative Bohm?
In my car by myself.
Okay. Representative Cretion?
Present in my home by myself.
Thank you. Ms. Costello?
In my home office in Dover by myself.
Okay. I am present. I'm in Litchfield by myself. Ms. Harrington?
Hi, I'm in Merrimack in my home office by myself.
Ms. Messmer?
Hey, Mindy Mesmer. I'm in my home in Rye in my office by myself.
Okay. Ms. Murphy?
Good morning, everybody. I'm home in Merrimack in a room by myself, but not alone.
Representative Nodder? Okay, I don't think I...
She's no longer on
Okay.
the commission.
Okay. Ms. Paradise?
I'm at my home in Bedford with my whole family here, and kids are in the room, but I'm only here.
Okay. Representative Rung?
I am in my home office in Merrimack alone.
Mr. Wimsatt?
Yes, good morning. I'm at my home office in Concord. I'm alone.
And Representative Woods?
Yes, I'm here and I'm at home in Bow alone.
Okay, I believe we have a quorum. Oh, yes, Dr. Bush.
I'm here too, alone in my office in Concord.
Okay, all right. Was there anyone else that missed the roll? Okay, we have a quorum. We'll proceed. You may have noticed that we have a new member to the commission, Representative Jackie Cretion. She's from Manchester. She was appointed this week along with myself by the Democratic leader, Representative Cushing. I have not yet heard about any appointments on the Senate side or from the majority office. So, you know, I'm sure by the January meeting, we'll have those appointments finalized. Before we move on, I want to recognize Town Councilor Nancy Harrington. Nancy?
Thank you very much, Rosemary. Although virtual, I believe we should still hold to proprieties. And I'd like to take this moment to propose a moment of silence in respect to the Merrimack representative and House Speaker, Dick Hinch.
Thank you very much, Ms. Harrington. I appreciate that. All of you should have received the draft minutes from our November 13th meeting. I'll entertain a motion to accept those minutes. Is everybody on mute? Oh, okay, Representative Woods moves. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Ms. Murphy seconds it. Are there any corrections, edits anyone would like to make to the minutes? Okay, seeing none, I'll ask Ms. Forty to call the roll to accept the minutes as submitted.
Okay. I for the information, we do have someone with their hands raised on the attendee side, and then there is a panelist listed that I don't have on the roll, so I'm not sure if that was a petition or.
No, that's a guest.
Okay.
Mr. Preventure is a guest.
Okay. So I will call the roll to accept the minutes. Mr. Ayotte.
Yes.
Mr. Bandazian.
I abstain. I was not present.
Representative Bohm.
Yes.
Dr. Bush.
Yes.
Representative Cretion.
I'll also abstain.
Ms. Costello.
Yes.
I will vote yes. Ms. Harrington.
I will also abstain. I was not present.
Ms. Mesmer.
Yes.
Ms. Murphy.
Yes.
Ms. Paradise.
She votes yes.
Okay. Representative Rung.
Yes.
Mr. Wimsatt.
Yes.
And Representative Woods.
Yes.
Okay. The motion passes.
Okay, thank you. We've had requests in the past by members of the commission to hear from the Merrimack Village District, an update on what is going on in Merrimack with MVD and Saint-Gobain. And I'm very grateful that the chairman of the Merrimack Village District Board of Commissioners has agreed to join us today to give us that update and to answer any questions that we might have. And I believe he has some slides to share, and I'm going to see. It's Don Preventure, and thank you very much, Don, for joining us today. I'm going to see if I can share, if he can share his screen. If not, I can bring up those slides. Can you try sharing, Don?
Yes.
There we go.
How's that? You can see that okay?
Very well, thank you.
Great. Well, thanks for having me today. As Rosemary said, I'm Don Preventure, Chair of the Merrimack Village District, MVD. And I can just start going through the presentation here. I put these slides together in the past. So what we're looking at here is a map of Merrimack. Obviously, everybody knows Bedford to the north, Amherst to the west, Nashua to the south, Litchfield to the east, the Merrimack River running in the southerly direction. MVD has 6 public water supply wells. They're sort of grouped together in groups of 2. We've got 2 wells in the northeast portion of the town, wells 4 and 5. 2 wells in the south central portion of town, wells 2 and 3. And then we actually have 2 wells. They're actually located in the town of Hollis, but they only serve water into the town of Merrimack. There are 2 known sources of PFAS emissions, one being St. Gobain up in the northeast corner of town, the other TCI, and then there's some other septic systems on Hoey Drive in Amherst. We do know St. Gobain we have reached a settlement agreement in 2018 with St. Gobain. MVD reached that settlement agreement, and that funded part of the construction, most of the construction of a PFAS treatment plant that has just recently been online since October. So a little bit more statistics here. We have a manganese and iron filtration plant using green sand down here at wells 7 and 8. The system is broken into 2 pressure zones because of the different elevations in town. And the elevations along the Merrimack River, as you would expect, are lower than the elevations out to the western part of the town. So we need to pump water. All of our wells pump into the low pressure zone, and we have a booster station that pumps water up into the high pressure zone. We've got 3 storage tanks. 2 of them are located on the high pressure zone. Only one of those is in use. And then the other tank is on the low pressure zone, and that's a 4 million gallon tank that is in use as well. So moving along, this is the history of contamination of just PFOA. PFOA is really the only PFAS compound that is in violation of the current 12 parts per trillion maximum contaminant level. You can see well 2 kind of bounces up and down above and below that 12 limit. But all the rest of our wells, wells 3, 7, and 8 are pretty consistently above the 12 parts per trillion. This is an older slide. We showed the 38 parts per trillion line here, which was the proposed MCL when the MCLs first came out, I believe, draft MCLs, which was, I believe, January of 2019. So basically all of our wells are over the limit. And I didn't show wells 4 and 5 here because we, quite frankly, hadn't collected data on those 2 wells because those were shut down in 2016, and they just now in October were reactivated because we have a PFAS treatment plant that came online. So there was really no purpose to sample over those 5 years that it took, those 5 summers that the wells 4 and 5 were not online. So that's why you're not seeing a history of wells 4 and 5, but those wells were consistently above between 70 and I think as high as 120 or 130 at some point in the past consistently. So sort of the history of the contamination of wells 4 and 5. Basically in the 80s, there was an existing factory owned by General Electric, which was then purchased by ChemFab Corporation. And I believe they began emitting PFAS into the air. That was probably sometime back in the 80s. I don't have exact dates. But then in early 2000, St. Gobain had a Vermont factory that they were using, and they were required by the state of Vermont to install air emission abaters. And instead of doing that, they decided to come over and relocate into Merrimack. So they purchased the ChemFab factory, and they basically continued those unfiltered emissions into the air. As everybody probably knows, the wind currents dispersed the PFAS regionally. There was widespread contamination of soil and groundwater in southern New Hampshire. the unfiltered PFAS emissions continue to this day. However, new legislation was proposed in 2019 that requires air emissions to be installed. And the Saint-Gobain has proposed a design. It was approved by DES. And my understanding is that's targeted to be installed in later on this year, next year in 2021. So again, back in 2016, the way the PFAS issue came to light was that Saint-Gobain actually tested their own water from a service tap connection from the MVD water system. And at that result was detected at 42 parts per trillion. At that time, the only limit that was in effect was an acute health advisory, I believe, at 400 parts per trillion. But that did not address the long-term chronic issue. So there was a like an interim 100 part per trillion limit that was set. And we tested all of our wells 4 and 5, as I said, were clearly above the 100 level. So those were shut down, but we tested the rest of our wells and those range between 8 and 48. So those were below the limit. And then later on, the EPA came up with a 70 part per trillion health advisory, or it was more of an advisory limit. It wasn't an MCL. But again, the remaining wells, 2, 3, 7, and 8 were below even the 70 limit. So MVD opened up an interconnection with Nashua to make up the water that was lost because we had to shut down wells 4 and 5. And we use that on sort of an emergency purpose. Our demands vary radically throughout the year. In the summer, you might have as high as 5 million gallons a day of water demand. But typically in the winter, we're down around 2. So summer use is quite a bit higher, obviously due to irrigation. So anyways, in 2016, DES embarked with Saint-Gobain on a significant investigation of the contamination that subsequently was found in Litchfield, Bedford, Merrimack, Londonderry, southern Manchester. I'm not sure if there were more towns that were affected than that. You may be aware of a health study that was done, a blood study in 2017. Department of Health and Human Services tested the blood of 217 MVD customers. My household happened to be one of those selected, so my family was tested. And the results of that study indicated that the average MVD customer's blood PFOA level was double the national average. So the average MVD customer had blood levels of 4 parts per billion, whereas the national average was 2 parts per billion. And I'm drawing the distinction here in parts per billion versus parts per trillion because in blood, PFOA is measured in parts per billion, whereas in drinking water, we're measuring in parts per trillion. So essentially what that means is that that is accumulating in our blood by a factor of 2 or 3 times order of magnitude. Just to give you a sense, the 4 parts per billion in blood is actually 4,000 parts per trillion. So that's the issue with PFAS, that it accumulates in your blood much higher than it does, much higher than what's measured in groundwater. So the settlement agreement that I mentioned between MVD and Saint-Gobain, that was effected 2 years after the contamination was discovered in 2016. So that settlement agreement was signed in the spring of 2018. And what that settlement agreement did was it required Saint-Gobain to cover $3.3 million towards the estimated $4.1 million treatment plant cost. So that left us with basically an $810,000 shortfall. As you can imagine, the estimate on the construction cost was done in 2017. So by the time construction came around in 2020, the actual cost ended up being $5.1 million. So it really and effectively left us in a $1.8 million shortfall. Now, we did secure a grant for $405,000 from the Drinking Water and Groundwater Trust Fund. So that did offset some of that 1.8 million. The settlement agreement, as I said, was based on a design that was only a 30% design level. So in the final design that was done, it was certainly found that things were missing, like pavement, other basic things that were left out of the settlement agreement, a backup generator, infiltration basins that we needed to discharge our backwash water into. Those things were left out of the settlement agreement and were costs that were not covered by Saint-Gobain. The settlement agreement also covered 5 years of estimated granular activated carbon media replacement. GAC, that's the media that we're using to remove the PFAS from the drinking water. I do want to say, if anybody's got a question, it might be good if you want to, maybe if Rosemarie, if you want to keep an eye on that, if someone has a question, if you want to ask now, it might be good instead of waiting till the end.
Thank you, Don. I do want to take this time. I didn't get noticed, but I understand that Representative Maureen Mooney and Representative Bob Healy have been appointed to our commission. So I'd like to welcome them. They're now panelists on this call. So I'm very happy to have you join us. I do notice that Ms. Murphy has her hand up. Do you have a question, Nancy?
Yes, based on what Dawn has been sharing, I just thought it'd be important to have on the record for those that may be listening in and not familiar. In terms of the costs and the things that were left out of that settlement agreement, Dawn, could you share who entered into that agreement and whether there was any knowledge or participation by the public who actually have been basically stuck with the costs of meeting those shortages? Can you share, just for people that may not know, both of those things, who was involved in the settlement agreement and whether or not there was any public knowledge of that or participation or any input? Thank you.
Yeah, so to answer that, the Board of Commissioners made up of 5 commissioners. So it was the 5 commissioners plus, the MVD superintendent and at that time, our legal counsel who got involved with the negotiations with Saint-Gobain. And the negotiations were all done in private, and there was no opportunity for any public involvement or review of the settlement agreement before it was signed and effected. So that is the case. And all of those 5 commissioners are no longer on the board this year. They, the last one was replaced in the election that happened in July of this year. So hopefully that answers that question.
Thank you, Don.
Sure. So again, the 5 years of operational operation and maintenance coverage. After 5 years, all of the cost of the O&M and replacing of the media is going to be on the burden of the MVD customers. So the settlement agreement basically established an escrow. Some of the construction costs went into an escrow, as well as 5 years of estimated operation and maintenance on those filters. However, since that time, based on other information in other parts of the state that use GAC, it turns out that those costs, which were estimated to cover 5 years, may now possibly only last as long as 2 years, because it's being determined that breakthrough is happening a little bit sooner than what was previously thought. So that's an issue. So those funds probably won't last the full 5 years of operation and maintenance that we thought it was going to last. And then, so the GAC treatment plant designer was selected by MVD. So we contracted with the designer. We paid the designer out of the settlement escrow proceeds. And again, at this time, all other wells 2, 3, 7, and 8 were in compliance below the 70 parts per trillion limit at that time. The benefits of the settlement agreement was so that it could avoid costly multiple years of litigation. The thought was that the PFAS treatment plant would get built sooner than later instead of being tied up in litigation for years. Reality is it still took 5 summers that we didn't have those wells online. All settlement funds were placed in escrow. MVD was able to design and build the treatment plant that we wanted. MVD staff operated the treatment plant as we want. So there was more autonomy on the part of MVD. And that settlement agreement is limited only to PFOA and PFOS. It can be reopened if other MCLs are established and violated. But again, at the time of the current MCLs, the only violation that we have in our wells is just PFOA. So as I said before, that plant went online just in October of this year. So the drawbacks of that settlement agreement was that MVD ended up assuming all of the risk, and they were construction cost escalation, design unknowns. There was an infiltration basin we needed to build because we had anticipated we were able to backwash the clean virgin carbon into the municipal sewer system, but we did not get approval to do that. So we had to build infiltration basins, and all that was an additional cost not included in the settlement agreement. So it was on the burden of the MVD customer, basically. And again, I just said again, it excluded other things that were not covered: a generator, pavement, chlorine injection, all things that are required but not related to PFAS. The settlement agreement only covered the things that were specifically related to PFAS. It was not designed for compounds such as the short chain compounds like PFBA, which usually break through first. So we're expecting that maybe that will break through in as recent as a year. We don't know yet because it just went online in October. So we still have to see where that goes. But as I said before, MVD would assume the cost in perpetuity after the estimated 5 years of treatment O&M funding is exhausted. Settlement agreement only applies to wells 4 and 5. You got to remember that all of our 6 wells exceed the MCL for PFOA, but this settlement agreement only applies to wells 4 and 5. There have been no other responsible parties identified at this time for the remaining wells at MVD. And as Nancy Murphy asked earlier, that it excluded the public review and participation in voting, and that did not go over well with many of our customers. So again, the polluter assumes essentially zero risk, and MVD assumes all of the risk. So we did a comparison. There was another settlement agreement with Saint-Gobain that already existed at the time that we were in negotiations for our settlement agreement. And that was a facility, a Saint-Gobain facility in Hoosick Falls, New York. But there's a significant distinction with the way New York handled this. The Department of Environmental Conservation actually effected the settlement agreement. And the result was that the responsibility for Saint-Gobain was that they needed to design and build the treatment plant themselves. There was an existing treatment plant there for iron and manganese, I believe it was, and it was expanded to add PFAS treatment. That entire design, construction, even the operation and maintenance of those filters were all, to this day, funded and continues to be funded by Saint-Gobain. I think there's another party involved in that settlement. I forget who it is, if it's GE or there's another, I don't think it's GE. There's another company that's involved with that, but still it's a very different result than what the settlement agreement was reached with MVD. So the responsibility for PFAS compliance falls with Saint-Gobain in Hoosick Falls. In MVD, that falls, in Merrimack, that falls on the backs of MVD. So like I said, even to this day, the filter treatment replacement is all done by Saint-Gobain. And the way we became aware of this is myself and a few other members of MVD went out and toured that Hoosick Falls treatment plant because we wanted to see what we were in store for when we built our own. And they were the ones that told us. We started asking them operational questions, and they came out and told us that we don't operate this thing. Saint-Gobain replaces all of the media. And so that was an eye-opener for us. And we did some research and found that actually to be the case. So what I wanted to show here is this is the letter, the consent order from the Department of Environmental Conservation to Saint-Gobain. That's the title page here. And on page 3, you can basically read down here that it says the respondent, which is Saint-Gobain, shall pay on a timely basis for all costs associated with design, installation, operation, monitoring, and maintenance for the full capacity system, and maintenance costs caused by the installation of the full capacity system. So that was the directive to tell Saint-Gobain that they're on the hook for this into the future. Now, in the same note, there was a letter, kind of a similar letter sent from the DES back in April 1st, 2016 to Saint-Gobain. And this is the cover page of the letter. And on page 3 of that letter, when you read, there's some very strong language that came out here. And it said that Saint-Gobain was going to be required to provide the design, installation, operation, maintenance, and monitoring of all water treatment systems necessary to remove PFC, which is PFAS. And this is specifically for all affected public water system suppliers to ensure the fully operational treatment not later than August 1st, 2016. So that was a directive to Saint-Gobain to have a permanent treatment plant online for any affected public water system, which the design, installation, operation, and maintenance costs would be on their burden within 4 months. Now, when I read this when it came out, I was ecstatic that the problem was going to be taken care of entirely on the burden of Saint-Gobain. So, you know, when you read through this, it sounds almost identical or even stronger than the letter that was issued to Saint-Gobain from the New York Department of Environmental Conservation. But somewhere along the line here, I don't know exactly the reasoning, and maybe Mike might want to talk about this if he was aware at the time. I'm not sure, but something happened along the way that the authority of DES apparently was not such that they could enforce this, and it turned out that MVD had to take on that settlement agreement with Saint-Gobain, and resulted into something quite significantly less than what was required in this letter. So that's an unfortunate thing that left MVD's customers, again, bearing the burden of this. So I guess lessons learned on a settlement agreement is, you know, we should put the burden of the construction costs, the risk on the polluter and not the victim, MVD's customers. We should have done a better thorough research of other settlement agreements that existed first. You know, seek the public's review, comments, and even voting on the agreement, which did not happen. And again, we should set the settlement agreement amount equal to the bid amount, not the construction cost estimate of a 30% design. You know, we should make the polluter design, build, and operate the treatment system. And the other thing here is the breakthrough. In Hoosick Falls, Saint-Gobain changes the media out as soon as the first PFAS compound breaks through, which is typically PFBA. It's a short chain compound that, because it's smaller, it passes through the carbon faster and breaks through first. It's not even regulated in New York or New Hampshire, but when that first breaks through, that's when Saint-Gobain changes the carbon in Hoosick Falls. This is what MVD's target is going to be. We want to have non-detect on all PFAS compounds. So the difference is here is that it might take 2 years for PFOA to break through, but it might take as short as 1 year for PFBA to break through. So the 5 years that we thought we had might be as short as 1 year worth of breakthrough. And again, I say we should not agree to too short of an O&M period. We have 5 years here in Merrimack. But the reality is, if you look at the half-life of PFOA, which is about 90 years, when you have a concentration up at wells 4 and 5 that exceeds 100 parts per trillion, that means in 90 years, that 100 will be down to 50. That's in the ambient groundwater I'm talking about. Another 100 years, the 50 will be at 25. And another 100 years, that 25 will be down to 12 and a half. So we've got 300 years of filter changeouts ahead of us before we can even think that the groundwater out there is going to be anywhere near to drinking water standards. So 5 years compared to 300, I mean, you can do the math on that, right? Now I'm going to move in to talk a little bit more about the remainder of our wells, 2, 3, 7, and 8. Because as I showed, all of those wells there was PFAS present. There were customer petition articles prepared, and that was the main funding mechanism used for wells 2, 3, 7, and 8. MVD is a private entity. It's not part of the town, so it's our own form of government. We have an annual meeting. There's 5 commissioners. We meet monthly. MVD can propose its own warrant articles, or the customers can propose their own petition warrant articles. MVD was sort of handcuffed at this time. There was pending litigation called the Dowling lawsuit that was filed by some residents of Bedford and Merrimack. And it was a joint filing against MVD and Saint-Gobain jointly. So we were very limited on what we could do to advocate for PFAS treatment because it would sort of look like MVD was implicating itself. So because of that, the customers ended up doing their own petition warrant articles. And basically any petition warrant article that requires a bond of over 100,000 must pass by the voters, the MVD voters of a 2/3 majority. So again, at this time, there is still no identified polluters at wells 2, 3, 7, and 8. So essentially a settlement agreement is not possible at this time, which is the reason why the customers decided to move ahead with their own petition warrant articles. Again, why did they do petition warrant articles? Wells 2, 3, 7, and 8 at the time were actually compliant. They were below the 70 limit. But what happened is in 2016, the limits originally, as I said, were as high as 400. They were dropped to 100 and then subsequently dropped to 70. So the customers are seeing these numbers going down drastically. That kind of raises a red flag in people's eyes. 2018, New Hampshire legislature passed the law to require DES to create health-based, science-based MCLs for 4 PFAS compounds. So then later that year, ATSDR came out with a screening level of PFOA at 11. Now that alarmed us because 11 was lower than any levels that existed in our well. But we were reassured that had nothing to do with drinking water limits. It was just a screening level. Really didn't understand the difference between the two, but that's what we were told. So then later on, beginning of January 2019, the draft MCLs for PFOA were released, and that level was at 38. Subsequently, in February, the DES issued a notice indicating that based on a study that was done out of Minnesota, that these MCLs may need to be substantially lowered below the 38 parts per trillion. So I think what happened was our customers see all of this information coming out, and it concerns them. So basically in February of 2019, an MVD customer filed 2 petition warrant articles. One article was to require PFAS treatment at wells 2 and 3. The other article was PFAS treatment at wells 7 and 8. So to make those warrant articles usable, I guess I would say, the MVD in 2018 in April, we became aware, that PFAS regulations were likely required or likely going to be created in the future. So we wanted to know for ourselves, the MVD commissioners wanted to know what kind of costs are we looking at if we have to treat the water some point in time in the future. So we actually commissioned a PFAS treatment cost study at our June meeting in 2018. And this is where in March, the first two new commissioners, Wolf, Von Schoen, and myself were elected. So at that time, I think, it was about the same time where people started to be more concerned about what's going on, what are we going to be faced with in the future. So the conclusion on the PFAS treatment cost study was that it would make sense to expand the existing iron and manganese plant at wells 7 and 8 to add a PFAS addition for PFAS treatment. And then the best alternative for wells 2 and 3 were to combine those two together. They're a little bit more than a mile apart. So it made more sense, instead of doing two separate plants at each one of those wells, that we would pipe them together at a location and build one central facility there. And then also in October of 2018, we commissioned a rate study. Once we knew what the estimated cost would be, we wanted to know what the rate impact study was. And it turned out that these two reports, the cost study and the rate study that were commissioned by MVD, were sort of critical tools that were used in the public hearings for those two petition warrant articles, because that's something that the customer needed to know, is what the rate impact was going to be if they were going to vote to go ahead and approve those warrant articles. So in the annual meeting of March 2019, prior to that, there was significant outreach, grassroots outreach by concerned citizens on Facebook, the Merrimack, New Hampshire Water Issue Facebook page, Citizens for Clean Water, and basically a lot of people were advocating for those warrant articles. And sure enough, there was 286 people came out, which is actually a very large attendance for an MVD annual meeting. And those two warrant articles passed by about 92% in favor. So basically what that vote required was that MVD was now required to move forward with PFAS treatment of our wells 2, 3, 7, and 8. So essentially that's going to result in all of MVD wells being treated for PFAS. And again, I'm noting that this is all elective treatment, because at the time that these warrant articles were passed, there were no violations in those 4 wells, 2, 3, 7, and 8 were all below 70. But the MVD customers that voted for this, they were not happy that, the limit was 70. They didn't want any PFAS in the water at all. The other thing I want to point out is that because there was no MCL violation, the design was based on a single vessel treatment system. And what that means is that we only needed half of the vessels that we would need if we were out of compliance. So it was a way to save cost, but it turns out that now that the MCLs are lowered and all of our wells exceed the MCLs, there's going to be additional costs that we're going to need to incur, because we have to go back now and add those lag vessels on. You always want to have like a backup vessel. The primary vessel is the one that's responsible to do essentially all of the removal of the PFAS. And the second vessel is sort of like a standby precautionary vessel. So when the media is changed in the first vessel, they switch the piping. So the lag vessel is the backup vessel, and then the other one becomes the lead vessel. So the impacts of that, as I said, in June of 2019, the PFOA limit of 12 was passed. And that requires us to do some testing. We're fully aware we're going to see the same results that we had in the past. And it's basically going to show that all 4 remaining wells are going to need to be treated. And I think we estimated the lag vessels might cost an additional $3 million on top of the $14.5 million treatment cost that was estimated for those wells for PFAS treatment. So that's going to look like we're probably up in the $17.5 million range. But essentially, by going ahead with those warrant articles, it basically put MVD ahead of everybody else by as much as 2.5 years at that time, because we were already embarking into the design phase by the time these MCLs got passed. So that the petition warrant articles were correct. The customers knew they did the right thing in my book, that they advanced this whole effort. And here's a breakdown on where the funding is coming from. It's a $14.5 million funding effort. Obviously, not, like I said, now that number is probably higher than 17.5. But essentially everything's coming except for 1.45 million in grant from the Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund, which is a great number to have. That's a 10% essentially grant right there. The rest of the 90% is coming from loans. One loan from Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund and another loan from the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. And then MVD Capital Reserves is $285,000. So we may need to seek additional funding with a warrant article either at next year or the following year's annual meeting to cover that shortfall that we need for the lag vessels, treatment vessels. And the other issue that we found is part of the cost of treating wells 2 and 3 was that we needed to fund an iron and manganese treatment for well 3 because it has elevated iron and manganese. And you got to remove the iron and manganese first before you put the rest of the water through the PFAS carbon plant, because that would just foul up the carbon in very short order. So we're looking at possible other alternatives to maybe replace well 3. And part of the reason is because we had detected also elevated sodium and chloride in that well. So we don't want to, commission money to treat well 3 if we might have a sodium and chloride issue. And I'll show you those graphs later. But this here, I just wanted to show you, this is the 2 central wells in Merrimack. The plan was to locate a treatment plant right sort of near the intersection of Industrial Drive and Continental Boulevard, kind of where the Dunkin' Donuts is right now behind there. We were going to put a treatment plant there, but now we have changed plans. We're going to build a plant over by well 2, and we are looking at a potential new well closer to well 2. And if we can get that well to be favorable and work out, preliminary indications look positive right now. So we are proceeding with a permanent well at this point. We did a test well a few months ago that worked out well. So now we're going with a permanent well. So between either that well and well 3, we're going to pump that water over to the treatment plant at well 2. We are building the treatment plant at well 2 with a capacity to handle the full flow rate from well 2, as well as the full flow rate from well 3. And it may be that some of that water may be relinquished to a new well, but we're going ahead on the construction design of a treatment plant that will have capacity to treat the amount of water that we're currently producing at wells 2 and 3, because that was what was approved in the warrant article. And here I'm showing you a graph of well 3's iron and manganese. The blue is iron. The secondary maximum contaminant level is down here at 0.3. We're seeing numbers as high as like between 1.5 and 2. Same thing with manganese, that orange line over here. The maximum contaminant level for that is 0.05. And we're seeing concentrations as high as 0.5 to almost 1.0. So that's clearly indicative that we've got to remove that iron and manganese first. And over here was what was alarming to us when we looked at the sodium and chloride levels. You can see that somewhere around 2011 or 10 or so, the trend started increasing significantly. So the issue with sodium and chloride is there's really no feasible way to remove that at the scale that we're looking at here we'd be looking at tens of millions of dollars just to remove sodium and chloride. So because of that, we were a little concerned about proceeding with the treatment plant at well 3. If there's a potential that we can't reverse this trend in sodium and chloride, that could potentially jeopardize the longevity of well 3. So that forced us to kind of look at an alternative well in that region. And so far, the test well showed that it does not have elevated sodium and chloride, nor elevated iron and manganese. So it's important that we get that well online. And I just wanted to end the presentation on this last slide. We periodically check in with the New Hampshire Legislative Service request query, and we did find these 3 bills. I believe they're brand new bills that are proposed for this session, upcoming session. And the first one is of particular interest to MVD because it requires parties responsible for pollution of drinking water supply to be financially responsible for certain consequences of that pollution. Now, obviously, we've got a settlement agreement for wells 4 and 5 in place, but that's limited to 5 years, as I explained. So I don't know what the text behind I don't know anything more than what I'm reading here, just the description of this bill. But I'm going to put it out to everybody in the audience that if you can find when more information is available on this bill, the specific language of that bill, that would certainly be of great interest to MVD to see if that has any possible repercussions on extending legally that 5-year window of operation and maintenance that we're currently limited to in the settlement agreement. And I see that one of the sponsors, prime sponsors on that is Dick Hinch on here. So Nancy, I know, the tribute to the silent moment that we spent to Dick at the beginning of this meeting. The way I feel about this thing is, if this was important enough to Dick and all the other sponsors on here to put forth, I would love to have all of the legislature gravitate around Dick's legacy and maybe see that this thing is seen through. And again, this goes back to all of the other work that was done in previous years. And I think Dick probably, I never talked to him about what this was all about. I wasn't aware, but seeing this here, as well as there's another bill here about creating a statute of limitation on civil actions relative to damage caused by PFAS substances. These are all things that could play into benefiting the MVD customer. So I'm very hopeful that this can move along and the language is strong enough that something beneficial and positive can come to the MVD customers. And that last one looks like Rosemary proposed that one. I'm not sure what that's about. If you want to bother saying a quick description.
Yeah, I can give a couple. Yeah. Well, first of all, to get to the first LSR, Representative Bohm from Litchfield is part of this commission. So
oh, great.
I don't know if he wants to give a rundown. It is very difficult to assess the information within a bill from the title of the LSR. It's usually just very general description. The actual body of the bill could be pretty different from what the title suggests. So, Representative Bohm, would you mind giving us a background about that LSR? I don't know if you're on mute or not. Yeah, you are on mute. Representative Bohm, I don't know if you're still joining.
Okay, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, we can hear you now. Great.
Okay, I seem to be half on the phone and half on my computer because I just got home. Okay, I can hear on my phone, but I can't hear from the computer, but you can hear me from the computer and you can. Okay. Anyway, yeah, the bill, I put it in September. Legislative Services was having some problems with it, and I was arguing with them about it. And they finally did it, what I think was last week, they finally put the text out, which is pretty much what I had put. It's more of, I don't know if it'll help MVD or not, but it basically, I hate that word, says that if a company is found responsible for polluting, and this is anything, it doesn't have to be PFOA, it could be anything, they will be responsible for hooking up the business or residents to a commercial town or other water source. They will pay for that. If that can't be done within 6 months, they will put a whole house filter on. Also, they will be required to pay for drinking water, which is pretty much what in Litchfield they're doing now, but this puts it in law rather than. And then they will be responsible for paying the water bill for 5 years or until the residence or business is sold. Okay, so that was one of the big issues that people had. Why am I not having to pay this ridiculous water bill? And then if anybody in Litchfield knows, the water bill in Litchfield is utterly ridiculous from Pennachuck, because I believe we're subsidizing all of Pennachuck East, which includes towns in Ware and all everybody else. So our water bill is a whole lot higher, and it's our water. Anyway, it comes from Litchfield. They buy it from Hudson, and then they sell it back to us. Anyway, and they're looking for an increase. So that's one of the things, the main thing we put on was that the company responsible would be responsible for paying the water bill for the people that were on wells that are no longer on wells. So I don't know how this could affect MVD, but that could be something we can look at for an amendment if something is needed. The text should be there now because it's just been signed off. So anybody want to look at that?
Okay, thank you very much, Representative Bohm. As far as the last LSR, that's really a housekeeping bill. I had resubmitted an LSR that was made by Nancy Murphy. It's just housekeeping to have consistent reference, so to change from PFC to PFAS, just so the reference that we use to describe that class of chemicals is consistent within the state's uses, and it's also consistent with what's used at the federal level. There is another LSR that's not included in this. It was a result of work that this commission did. It's to add a town representative and a citizen representative from the town of Londonderry. So that LSR has been submitted as well. It's I'm the prime sponsor, and Representative Doug Thomas from Londonderry is a co-sponsor. Anyway, I noticed that Ms. Murphy, you had your hand up. Do you have a question? And I'll also entertain. I think Dawn, we're ready. We're ready to accept some questions.
Yeah. Do you want me to keep my screen, or in case there's a question on any particular slide or anything?
Yeah, that might be a good idea.
Okay.
So if you have a question, you can either go like this or raise your hand on Zoom. But I noticed that Ms. Murphy had her hand up earlier.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Rosemary. First, I wanted to say thank you so much to Dawn for, number one, the presentation was phenomenal. But even more importantly than that is the work that he and Wolf and our new commissioners have done on behalf of Merrimack residents. As he's outlined, we were put in a very difficult position in terms of a settlement agreement that was inadequate and left things and costs out that was really not in the best interest of MVD customers. We are going to be absorbing filtration costs in perpetuity for wells 4 and 5 that, it's certainly disappointing to say the least. The fact that you guys have worked so hard to proactively protect our drinking water, to think ahead, to become informed advocates, and working really on behalf of Merrimack residents. So I thank you so much. One of the questions I had was, if you could tell me why that new plant was going to be moved closer to well 2 as opposed to the industrial drive area. And if you had any idea what might have happened in 2010, 2011 with regard to the increase in the sodium chloride levels. I know over the last couple of years in attending MVD meetings, we've talked about concerns regarding the sodium levels in our water. And I'm just thinking in terms of health impacts. I know that we certainly have hypertension and all those kinds of things that are in addition to, impacts of PFAS. We certainly are worried here in Merrimack about the health risks. So if you have an idea, maybe you could share with us about any thoughts as to what might have happened in 2010, 2011, that would be great. Thank you, Don.
Sure. Ironically, I don't know specifically what happened, but there's definitely an increase in trend here. Ironically, there was a salt mitigation effort that was implemented in 2012, and it seems to have worked in the opposite of what we wanted to have the result. When I say we, I wasn't, I wasn't even part of the commission at that point, but there's another graph that I didn't put on here. It did work successfully at wells 7 and 8. And you see the reverse of what you're seeing here is you see the trend line actually dip down to the negative. So those sodium and chloride levels started coming down, and that's our well over in Hollis. So Route 101A and a lot of the parking lots, the commercial parking lots over there, they, changed their salting practices, and it did cause a reduction. However, in this area here, well 3, you're looking at the DOT actually does the snow maintenance for Industrial Drive and Continental Boulevard going south of Industrial Drive. So the town is responsible on Continental Boulevard north all the way back to exit 11. And there's some additional maps. We have collected surface water and groundwater samples in the well 3 watershed. And it looks like the main problem is in the southeast quadrant of that intersection with Industrial Drive and Continental Boulevard. So once we saw this led MVD to embark on a whole nother effort that we've been spending a lot of time and effort and money on, which is a salt mitigation effort. And just about a month ago or 3 weeks ago, we actually had a virtual webinar that was attended by at least 20 people. There were a couple representatives from DES that were experienced in salt issues and mitigation like this. We sent out letters to private landowners, commercial parking lot owners. We invited them to come. We invited the salt applicator contractors to come. We educated them that there's a green snow pro I guess it's course or something you can take that demonstrates on different ways that you can better apply salt products and non-salt products, including more natural de-icing compounds. And then obviously there's brine that's being used now by the DOT. But we need to have more of the private parking lot owners take a look at using brine and other things, because that minimizes the total salt load, and that will reverse this trend. We're also that salt study was done primarily through Emery and Garrett Groundwater, which is our groundwater consultant, and they've got a lot of experience in this. So that went very well. That was about an 1.5-hour long presentation that was recorded. It's been archived. We're going to try and follow up with all of the attendees of that meeting and do a press release. We want to promote this as much as possible so people are aware. The town was present at that meeting as well. The town does take some certain initiatives on their trucks to make sure that they're not oversalting things. But, we got to keep going on this. We want to identify parts of town that have low salt, no salt use. I can't tell you why this occurred, but I can tell you it's a problem, and we're working hard to try and reverse that trend. Your other question about wells 2 and 3, as you can see in this area, we wanted to design and locate the treatment plant near well 3. It's just that we have more usable land over there. So the plan was to run this 1.25 mile cross-country transmission line over to the plant and to treat both wells at this plant in this location. However, since we saw the sodium and chloride issue in well 3 over here, we were a little bit cautious whether it makes sense to proceed with well 3, knowing that we have a sodium and chloride issue there, that if left unmitigated, possibly could render well 3 unusable in the future. So we didn't want to spend money putting a treatment plant to treat iron and manganese at well 3 if there's a chance that well 3 may not be usable. We're not saying it's not usable, but if that trend line keeps going that way, if it doesn't reverse, that's where it's going to end up. So we do know well 2 is the biggest well producing well that we have. It's the lowest PFAS well right now as well. So we are definitely never going to plan on getting rid of well 2. So what does that mean is if well 2 is always going to be there, is always going to be our main producing well, let's, instead of putting the treatment plant near well 3, let's put the treatment plant near well 2. And as I said, we're looking for an additional well right now over in this location. If you can see my cursor, it's a little closer to well 2. The transmission line won't be quite as long instead of going from well 3 to well 2. So if this pans out to be a better well than well 3, then we're probably going to pursue that well as a permanent well to be tied into the treatment plant at well 2.
Okay, thank you. I'm a little bit cautious of the time. It's 11:07 and we still have a lot on our agenda. Right. Are there any other questions for, oh yes, Ms. Harrington.
Have to remember to unmute. Okay, first of all, I'm not making insinuations, Don, but it is interesting that the outlets opened in June 2012. I know that there were some testing sites on that property for a while. I'm not sure if they're still there and whether, because MVD required it. And I would assume you could get sodium testing done from them if they still exist. But anyway, I just thought I'd point that out.
Yeah.
Which you probably already know, but it's an interesting coincidence. Quick question about wells 4 and 5. Have you done, I know they've only been open since October, but have you had any initial testing done for PFOA?
Yes, so what's coming through the filters is non-detect, as was anticipated. Okay. And I was told we even collected a sample out in the distribution system, still on the north side of that town, north of those wells. And the distribution system was coming out non-detect there as well. Now, obviously, the rest of the distribution system to the south does have PFAS in it because it's still being fed by the remaining wells that are not treated for PFAS yet. So the preliminary indications on wells 4 and 5 treatment is that it's working as planned. The question is how long is it going to take before we have breakthrough?
Okay, and a backup just a quick on that, and perhaps you already intimated just what you said a moment ago, the impact on the total water distribution, because it gets blended, right?
Well, it's not completely mixed throughout the entire distribution system.
Okay.
If you look at, this first slide, basically wells 4 and 5 will have a priority, a preference to feed users in the vicinity of the wells. So you're going to get more of non-detect in this area here, as opposed to down here where these 2 wells have PFAS in them. The preference is those wells basically feed areas down here. There's definitely blending in between those 2 sources. Okay. But essentially you're going to get lesser or non-detect PFAS up in this area and gradually more detections of PFAS down in this area.
Okay, so the statistics that you showed, first of all, they're a little older, but is there a difference in the last month or two in the PFOA and compared to what you showed already? I understand what you're saying. The northern part of town would show it dramatically different because they're blending with 4 and 5, right?
Right.
And the further south you go, the less distribution there is from 4 and 5. So that concentrate of PFOA would be higher.
That's
Is
right.
that correct? Okay.
Yes.
So
And that varies based on the output of the wells, you know, things like that. So right now in the winter months, when our demand is way down, well 3 is not even online anymore, which is good because that was the highest PFAS well that we had.
okay.
Well 2 is always going to stay online because that's the lowest PFAS concentration and it's got the highest output. So we always want to keep that online. Well 7 and 8 are close to well 3. And we do need to keep those online for replenishing our source. But so you're going to have a variation in concentration like that because depending on who's using water, where in the distribution system, that acts like a magnet and it draws more water to those locations. So it's a very variable type of system that we have out here, but primarily because the northern wells are so far from the rest of the wells and there's a lot of distribution system to the north of these wells. Generally, the water that flows to this northeast corner of Merrimack essentially comes almost exclusively, typically from wells 4 and 5. Obviously, if these are ever shut down for maintenance or anything like that, the rest of these wells are going to supply this area. So you're going to have changes in concentrations depending on when the wells are on or offline. But the goal is once all of these 6 wells are treated, we're basically going to have non-detect is the goal throughout the distribution system. So that's what we're shooting for.
Thank you. And as you mentioned, the time of year and the need for the amount of water will certainly influence that as well. And I think, however, it highlights an issue in terms of public education. I think there is a misunderstanding that there is a blending throughout town. So whatever you're seeing at one site, you're going to see at all sites. And it sounds like that's not true. That in fact, northern part of town, because 4 and 5 now are non-detect, they will have the benefit of that, but not necessarily the south. Is that correct?
Right. Yes, that's
a misunderstanding that many people in town just don't know about. Because they think, okay, 4 and 5 is on, and I've heard it more than once. Therefore, the whole system is going to benefit as a result and have decreased PFOA. And what you're saying, that is not true.
That's right. I mean, we haven't modeled this, you know, because we're hoping within the next 2 years, the whole system is going to be non-detect. So, you know, we've been serving this water since the 80s.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what's the point of modeling something that's going to exist for another year and then hopefully we'll be all non-detect at that point. So, but there, you know, just knowing as an engineer what I know about water distribution systems, and what we have actually found in the recent sampling that was done. As I said, I think I was told that at Society Hill, there was a sample taken of PFAS. That's a residential community to the north. That was non-detect. There were some other locations in the distribution system between the 2 wells that did detect PFAS. So what I'm telling you is basically what we're seeing as well in the samples that we took more recently.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Sure.
Are there any other questions? Ms. Murphy?
Sorry, just quick. Just based on what Dawn said, I have actually 2 questions that maybe Mike could respond to. One was regarding that letter, the Don Cheadle letter dated April 1st, 2016, and it had language which would have held St. Gobain accountable. Maybe does Mike have a sense of what might have happened that language didn't go forward, or you know, was DES what happened so that didn't happen for us, that happened for Hoosick Falls? And then the second question was based on the expected down the road cost for 2 MVD customers to work on wells 2, 3, 7, and 8. What is the plan, if any, and the timeline for determining responsible parties for that, so that Merrimack Village District may be able to enter into, you know, a settlement agreement so that Merrimack residents will not have to continue to absorb the cost of, you know, damage to our water by polluters that are are not currently being held accountable to paying for that. So thank you.
Sure. So thank you, Representative Murphy. So with regard to your first question, it's really hard for me to say. Those negotiations between MVD commissioners and St. Gobain, I was not, directly involved in those, and nor was DES was involved, but kind of on a sideline basis. So I'm afraid I just don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure what specifically led to that agreement that was reached. As far as your second question goes, obviously we're continuing to do work with respect to site investigations and trying to identify the sources of any contamination in a number of locations around the communities. So that work will continue, but I don't have a direct answer for you on that today.
Can you tell me, Mike, why would DES be on the sidelines of that agreement? I mean, when I certainly wasn't there either, but I would think the MVD would be looking to DES for, some guidelines and support and assistance dealing with that back in whenever 2016. How and why was DES not like a driving force in that in that agreement?
Well, all I can tell you is that agreement was not, DES was not a party to that agreement. That was an agreement and a negotiation between the MVD commissioners and the company.
Would that be because the MVD made that decision themselves? Or
I don't know the answer to that, and I don't want to conjecture an answer.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Mesmer?
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Don for an excellent presentation as well. It really laid out in a really lucid way what a complicated history this has been. So I really appreciate that. I just wanted to raise a couple of questions. One was, I also serve on the Pfas RAB, and we at Pfas, the AIMS system has a pre-treatment regenerative resin bed, which preserves the life of the carbon vessel that comes after the resin beds. And it takes out the short chains, and it's regenerative, so there's no waste, and it preserves the life of the carbon. So I don't know if you have been looking at that as a potential way to extend the life of the carbon, because we still have a continuing source of pollution, which is leading to my other question here. I mean, if in all, 5 years of O&M is short, even if you didn't have that, but you have a continuing source of pollution that continues to pollute the air and the groundwater, will contribute to a very long lifetime of O&M for these systems. So I just wanted to bring that up. If you hadn't considered it, there's a lot of information that I can provide to you on those resin beds and the treatment, and I'm sure Mike could do that as well. But my question is, and I'm not sure if you're the appropriate one to answer this, or maybe Nancy, where does that stand with respect to the HF scrubbers that, I'm very concerned about? Even though they're going to be putting this Thermox system on, we're going to be seeing some products that we don't know about, plasmas and other things from that emission that the HF scrubber could alleviate. So I wanted to know where that request on the variance, or actually the air pollution emissions, lies in Merrimack right now. I haven't heard anything about what's happening with that.
I can respond a little bit. Do you want me to go ahead, Rosemary?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. It's still up in the air, although our attorney, as well as the director of wastewater treatment plant, who is an expert on this, everyone knows Sarita and her vast knowledge, they went before the commission, the air control, is that the right name?
Air resources.
There you go. And provided some testimony so that they could come to a decision earlier and not have to wait until February or March. In the meantime, you're talking about the scrubber, right, Mindy?
Yes, I am. The scrubber, yep.
So that has not been resolved yet, but we are still actively involved in it. And we understand that is not going to slow down the installation of the filtration system in general.
So there's no plan right now for where that, moving forward on that request?
We do not have a definitive answer yet, but we're still fighting for it.
And I can say, as a member of the Community Action or Community Advisory Council for St. Gobain, and Mr. Wimsat's on that as well, is they're installing the RTO in January. They're not sure they can meet the permit date in February, but they will be doing testing along, and they're going to use those results to assess the need for the scrubber. I don't know how that decision, how much it's spurred into the town's request for reconsideration of the air permit to include the scrubber. But from St. Gobain's point of view, they're going to be relying on some test results of the stack emissions in order to determine the HF scrubber. That's apart from if it is a mandated action that gets included in their permit. Mr. Wimsat, is that your recollection as well from the meeting the other night?
Yeah, so just a point of clarity, the town of Merrimack's appeal, which is in large part centered around the concern about there not being an HF scrubber that's required, is still pending. There was to have been a December hearing, but because of a variety of procedural matters that the parties couldn't agree on, that hearing is now looking like it's going to be more in March or April. So that matter is still pending before the Air Resources Council.
Okay. All right. I do want to move the meeting along. Are there any other questions for Mr. Prevention before we go to the next agenda item?
Representative Rung, if I could just make two quick comments.
Please do.
First of all, Representative Healy and I were appointed by Speaker Hinch on Tuesday to this commission. Obviously, we've had a devastating week, so I apologize if that message of our appointments was not communicated to this commission. My second point, thank you, Don, for the presentation. Fantastic. I just want to add another LSR for you to watch, and that is LSR 608 that I put in at the prompting of Representative Hinch, who asked that I get into touch with Laureen Allen, which we discussed. 608, the LSR on the list, it's no wonder it's not on your list because it's grossly mislabeled. Okay, so my first edit will be the label. I don't have a draft yet. However, the spirit of the LSR is that it would essentially be a findings bill based on the MVD settlement of March 2018. And the closest I can give you to language without having seen a draft yet or the title being corrected is House Bill 494 from 2019. A similar, in fact, according to the LSR drafter, the only other findings bill she's ever drafted. So I can forward that link, but I'd refer to that in terms of the idea behind that's LSR 608. Thank you, Representative Rung.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you, Representative Mooney. Are there any other questions? I'm trying to, I don't see any hands. Oh, Representative Bohm. And I believe you're on mute. There you go. We can't hear you, Representative Bohm. You're not on mute. Oh, yes. Okay, now you're okay now. I still can't hear you.
I'm trying to get him unmuted here.
Oh, okay. Representative Bohm?
Am I still?
Oh, we can hear you.
Am I
Great.
still muted?
No, you're okay. Go ahead and speak.
Okay, good. Anyway, yeah, Representative Hinch asked to be put on my LSR, not the other way around.
Okay.
Also, and one of the problems I had with legislative services that Representative Mooney just said, they kept saying, well, how do we find blah, blah, blah? And I'm going, that's your problem, not mine. Anyway, so maybe with what Representative Mooney said and what they might come together. So anyway, just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't believe there are any other questions. I don't see any hands raised. So I want to thank you very much, Mr. Preventure. I do want to let you know that I'd like to put your presentation on our commission website. Do you have any concerns about that? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I don't think there's a problem, but I'd like to get back to you first on that. I probably just
Okay.
want to have some other eyes on this to make sure that that's okay. If
Okay.
that's all right.
All right. Yeah, if you could get back to me as soon at
Yeah.
your earliest convenience, that would be great. Thank you.
I will. Okay.
All right. Okay. Oh, Ms. Harrington.
The only thing I was going to suggest is perhaps we can have a copy for our minutes.
Yes,
Mhm.
I will send a copy out at the end of this meeting to
Thank you very
everyone.
much.
Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Preventure. We're going to move on to our agenda.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. And you're welcome to stay if you'd like, but we do want to move on. If
Thanks.
you-
I think I will exit the meeting and get on with my work day. But I
Okay.
appreciate the opportunity and thanks for all the information.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you all.
Item number 6 on the agenda is the update on the public information plans. If you remember from our last meeting, Ms. Paradise, Ms. Murphy, and I believe Ms. Forty had agreed to work offline on how we can communicate with the public, particularly notifying those private well owners about the opportunity to have their water tested and be included in that Golder study. So Ms. Paradise, would you like to give us an update on that?
Certainly. We did meet, it was actually Nancy Murphy and I that met before the weekend before Thanksgiving, and we are trying to come together with we brainstormed some ideas to get in touch with our local communities. One of them that came up was a monthly column in local newspapers. I know that Bedford has a Bedford Bulletin, and it came to my attention that Merrimack does not have one. And we needed to get the information about Litchfield and the other surrounding communities. We found, I know for Bedford, a lot of people do go to the Bedford Bulletin, and I did connect with, it's Susan Clark, who's our local editor, and she would like to have a monthly column informing our community about the work that is being done and the topics that are being discussed. We also discuss writing that same article for the local community patch online newspaper, just another excellent source of distributing information to a different people, registering ourselves as, the local experts on this commission. And it's simplifying the work and the conversation we are having here on the commission into, I don't want to say more layman terms, but kind of just breaking down into simpler terms to get the information out to the public and distribute it. So it'll be an online form as well. Hopefully the Union Leader and Nashua Telegraph could also pick this up as part of it. Another source, I know that I brought it up last meeting, and invite to Mike Wimsat, but also utilizing our local cable TV sources. We just only discuss that lightly, and hopefully we can take it next level starting either January or February of next year.
Okay, and I think Ms. Harrington brought up a really good point that we should include in public communications, at least for Merrimack, is the fact that many people are under the misperception that the water is evenly distributed throughout town, that there's a proportional blending, and that's not the case. So it would be nice to update them on that.
No, I think that's very important, because I know I can probably speak on behalf of the Greenfield Farms community. They are under the impression it's all diluted and distributed equally. So that was eye-opening for myself, and I can guarantee it'd be eye-opening for that local community as well.
Okay, so do you have plans to meet again, the three of you, to develop these plans further?
Yep. Hopefully we will be meeting next week. We're just trying to decide the day that works best for that to happen. But, you know, we have an email chain going on.
Okay. All right. And perhaps if the three of you might also give consideration to the public hearings that we also spoke about last month. I know Dr. Bush and Mr. Wimsatt had talked about that it's time to hold public hearings again, and whether that's done remotely as DES has done with public hearings, or I don't know if we'll be at a place where we can have an in-person public hearing, but those kind of information sessions to update the public on everything that's happened. And I think I did get an invitation to the Apple Tree Grant. I'm sure you'll update us that in your report, but I see a center of action for this commission is going to be on public communication within the next few months. Are there any questions or comments on that? Seeing none.
May I just add one last thing, Rosemary? We may be reaching out. If anyone wants to join, it is open, but we also may be reaching out to a couple people to assist or just for more information base. I know Nancy could probably speak a little bit more to this. I know that we brought up Ms. Messmer's name. I don't have the notes in front of me that we wanted to at least ask you, because I know of your important work on the Seacoast and all the hard work you've put into this.
Okay. All right. So I'm
If
going
I could just make
yes.
one additional comment. Looking at the information that the DES posts on responses in the Goldner work plan, there are 2 letters sent out, and the response rates vary from community to community. Predictably, in Londonderry, where this is relatively new, there's a very high response rate. In Bedford, and even to a greater extent in Merrimack, where there may be some feeling of mission accomplished, there's a much lower response rate, about 50%. And it's very easy for a town manager or governing body to parse those lists and see who's not responding. And I would certainly recommend, whether it's a town manager, town administrator, or town council or select board chairperson, that they write a letter to the resident as well, because providing public water is very, very expensive. If we don't have compliance with the work plan or participation in it, it is much more likely that a municipality is going to end up paying the lion's share of extending public water, or we're going to see point of entry systems dotting municipalities. So I would just make that one suggestion, that there be involvement of the local municipality as well, if someone has not responded to 2 letters, to have testing done.
Thank you, Mr. Madazian. I know that at the St. Gobain CAC meeting the other night, it was brought up that having letters continue to be sent out by Golder may not be effective because of the lack of trust or credibility, or the perception of that by the homeowner, that it would be probably get more attention if it comes from the town or some neutral party. Ms. Harrington, did you have a question?
By which we could get that list? Because I agree with you, Chris.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Wimsatt, do you have that list?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, as we were on that call with the CAC, and I did hear from them that Golder, or rather SG, was interested in pursuing, you know, some additional notification procedures. I think that for their purposes, they're going to need to continue to reach out because they have to get an access agreement and such. So I think whatever we did would be, you know, supplemental to what they're doing. So I think that I'm very receptive to the idea of working with local town officials to develop some language for a sort of companion letter that would be sent separately, you know, but maybe in concurrently or at a very similar time that that St. Gobain's letter goes out, to encourage people that, you know, this is something that's really in their best interest. It's not just the the company trying to,
Exactly.
failure or something, and that their town leaders are really engaged and want them to participate in the sampling. So I think that's a really great idea, and I think that's something we should pursue.
I think it's not only encouraging, but it will add to the validity of it, because people are suspicious, as they should be. There's too many things going around, and they may look at it and throw it out and not even read it. But, and I would only disagree with one point. If they see the envelope is from the town of Merrimack, they're going to open it and read it. Whereas if it's from St. Cobain or whatever, they may not. So perhaps the letter could be written, sent separately, or put what needs to be done from DES or St. Cobain in with a letter from Merrimack, because I really do think it starts with the envelope and what they receive.
Yeah, I completely agree that the communication from town officials should be separate and apart. And I think that will help really give folks a lot of, first of all, keep them from, in case they threw out what they got from St. Cobain or Golder, and also just give them a much higher level of confidence that it's something that they should be participating in. So I'm ready and willing to help, see if we can set that up, and probably Bedford, Merrimack, and Londonderry, to the extent that we think it would be helpful.
So will you be contacting the town managers, or who? Just because I can let her know.
Yeah, I could do that. And actually, I'm going to reach out to St. Cobain too, and talk about, the timing of that. If we can get their list, we get a report from them about who they've identified in a given period of time. But I think that if we can get an idea of what they're going to be sending out, and the town officials could send a letter concurrently, I think that would be the most powerful way to make it happen. So I'm happy to take the lead on that.
Okay. Okay, so we have an action item that Mr. Wimsatt, you'll contact St. Cobain to get a mailing list, and also I know I asked at the CAC for the letter that they send out. I wanted to look at that text, but I haven't received it yet. But if we could get that and forward that to the town managers, that they could then use or leverage for their own mailing, and also any date of that resend, so we can make sure that the letters arrive. At least maybe the town alerts the residents just prior, letting them know that there's going to be this release form that's going to be coming in from Golder.
And I will talk to the town council to update them, because they'll have to get permission for the town manager to do that.
All right, so the ball's in your court, Mr. Wimsatt.
Got it. Very good. Thank you.
Okay, if there's, Ms. Forty, you have your hand up?
Yes, hi. I just wanted to say I had sent an email. I know that we have been corresponding back and forth, Ms. Paradise and Ms. Murphy and myself. I'm trying to connect with some of the local Litchfield media. I have sent 2 emails now to the Litchfield Select Board, trying to get them on board with the letter situation. I'll try again. I haven't gotten any response.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no more hands up on this, I'm going to move on to the next agenda item. Status of blood sample retention request. If you remember, this was something that we discussed, I believe, at our September meeting. I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Murphy, and I know Ms. Mesmer had also sent me a response letter, but I'll let the two of you lead this agenda item. Ms. Murphy?
Oh, great. Thank you, Rosemary. I think Dawn did a great job of providing a little bit of history regarding the Merrimack contamination, and how in 2017, DHHS tested the blood of 217 Merrimack Village District customers. Those blood samples remain in the possession of DHHS's public health labs. Over the last number of months in our subcommittee, our health subcommittee, the issue was raised that about the value of those blood tests, given that there are not that many samples, but they were taken around the time of within a year or so of the discovery of the PFAS contamination from St. Cobain. And as the other thing was, as Dawn said, the average PFOA was at least double the national average. We certainly know that there are health impacts known to be associated with that kind of exposure. So we, as a subcommittee, had requested from that those blood samples be retained for future use and future study. With us gave a presentation, and we followed up with a letter to her to make that request, and she responded, I think it was September 3rd, with some additional questions about retaining the serum samples. And what we have is a draft letter that was to be approved so that we can send it so that those serum samples are not discarded. And I don't think I'm just, maybe for the record, just I'll read a couple of the paragraphs that the rationale for keeping those samples. The Health Subcommittee has reviewed Dr. Bean's response to the Commission's March 6, 2020 inquiry relative to the current status of the serum samples, and we wish to provide the information that she had requested. The ongoing nature of PFAS contamination discovery and response is continuing to evolve here in New Hampshire and across the nation. Merrimack is the site of the largest industrial environmental disaster in the state's history. Given the exceptionally long-term and ongoing exposure of the Merrimack community has had to these chemicals, citizen concern about current or as yet undiagnosed potential health impacts is heightened. The information that these serum samples may provide could be invaluable to understanding PFAS, as well as the risks of exposure and impact to public health. While knowledge in the field is advancing, some critical knowledge gaps remain for which future testing of these samples may provide valuable answers. The opportunity to retain specimens, that have potential to be valuable for future use in the study of PFAS and public health is available to us. Though we're not currently aware of specific studies or testing options available to further develop the knowledge we seek, the science is evolving and new analytical methods are being developed. Given their potential value, access to these samples for inclusion in future testing and studies with the consent of the participants should remain an option. We understand that there are storage considerations and that the serum samples reference cannot be stored indefinitely, but we would like the storage and maintenance of the samples currently in DHHS position be for a period of 5 years from the close of the MVD PFC community exposure assessment for which they're being currently held. So this letter would request the DHHS initiate reconsent and storage actions necessary to allow for the retention and maintenance of the above referenced serum samples by the Department of Public Health Laboratories. And Dr. Bean had asked for, a length of time that and that would be for reconsenting, that notification to the participants. And 5 years is what was proposed in this draft letter. Given the differences, and we have seen significant differences in what we knew in 2016 as opposed to where we're at now. And rather than have to do something annually with the cost of reconsent and the time and stuff like that, the thought was that would be an acceptable period of time. So that would be the draft letter. I think everybody has it. It was emailed, and if not, for new members, we could make sure we could get that out too. But I would ask that we review this, we make a decision as to whether or not that this needed to be edited or any changes, or that we can send it so that DHHS has a response to their letter, and that our request for the retention of those blood samples is on record. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Murphy. I did send out a copy, that draft letter. I don't know if everybody got it. I know there was an email issue with a couple of people, and Representative Mooney and Representative Healy, I'll make sure you get all that material too. So the action that we would need to do as a commission is to approve finalizing that draft letter and sending it to DHHS. Do you think we're prepared at this time, Representative Murphy, to do that, or should we have that approval placed on the next meeting agenda? I would like to have, my preference is to put it on the next meeting's agenda for approval, because We do have some new commission members, and I would like them to have the opportunity to read the background on all of that so that they're informed. Do we have a consensus that we will take that action at the next meeting? I see heads nodding. Okay, so I'll have it on the next agenda to approve the or to take action on that letter, to finalize it and make a decision whether to send it. Okay, great.
We may
Moving.
have 2 senators then.
Yes, we're definitely in flux. So hopefully by the next meeting we'll be fully staffed.
Representative Brown?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I just that this letter has been sort of, we're a couple of months already behind. So I would just ask that if we could get the names of anybody that has been appointed, so that we can make a decision on that date and not push it out any further. I'm really concerned that the number of months that have passed that we have not yet responded, and I certainly don't want anything to happen to those blood samples in the interim. So I think we need to move on that at the very latest at our next meeting.
Yeah, and I'll call Senator Morse too, and ask him when we can expect those appointees. So moving on to item number 8, review of interim report recommendations. If you remember, the interim report we submitted in November had a list of legislative and non-legislative actions. I'm not going to go into that in detail because of the time of this meeting, but expect all of you to receive a table listing each of those actions. Representative Mooney, I would also like to include, even though it wasn't part of that interim report, include your LSR onto that. And we can use that as sort of a running log of how well we're meeting those recommendations and if any of them need to be modified. So look to that as like a working tool that this commission will use to track our progress on those. We may be also using it to add any new items that we want to recommend. Right now, I'm just looking at it as a Word document. So if as long as that format is amenable to everybody, I started already. It's a Word document, a table. Okay, thank you. And then the next item, I haven't really been tracking if the subcommittees, the health and environmental subcommittees have been meeting, but with our new membership, it might be a good idea to relook at the membership of those subcommittees. So at the next meeting, when we are fully staffed, I'd like to ask Mr. Badazian, I think you were heading up the environmental subcommittee, and Ms. Murphy, were you doing it for the same for health, or Ms. Mesmer? If you could at least maybe at the next meeting, we can reorganize those subcommittees and get on a schedule again for meetings. But to my understanding, they haven't met the past month, have they? I haven't heard of any meetings. Okay.
We've done that, no.
Okay, so we'll relaunch those in January. Okay, next on the update, Mr. Wimsatt, do you have an update from DES?
Yes, I do. In the interest of time, I'll move pretty quickly, but I'll be happy to answer any questions that my speed might engender. So first of all, just as I mentioned, the permit is in effect for the regenerative thermal oxidizer. The latest information that we received from Saint-Gobain, which I think Representative Rung, you heard at the CAC meeting that we attended, is that the on-site electrical and support systems construction that needs to happen to prepare to receive that treatment unit is progressing pretty well at the facility. And of course, they do have the regenerative thermal oxidizer, what they call the RTO, ordered. But I do want to share that they stated that there's no confirmed ship date for that unit at this point. It's being custom constructed, and they have not been able to get a commitment from the manufacturer on when that will be shipped. And they did express some concern about whether it would arrive in time for installation by the February deadline. So I wanted to make you aware of that. We already talked about the town of Merrimack appeal, so I'll skip over that. Saint-Gobain, as I mentioned last time, has submitted a supplemental site investigation report that includes a preliminary screening of the potential remedial alternatives, and that plan still is undergoing review at DES, and we'll report on that at a future meeting. I think folks are aware, some folks may be aware that Flatley, a neighboring property owner, is planning to do a development actually on a parcel that lies between the plant site and the main road there on the west side of the plant site. And they've submitted, basically, we've received a work plan from Flatley from their consultant for conducting soil sampling on the parcels in that area where they're planning for the future development. And recently, in response to Flatley's request, we had a meeting with interested parties, including Flatley and MVD representatives. Mr. Provencher was attending that meeting, and the town's building and development staff. So that is an issue that's still out there. On the water line, not much change from the last meeting, which is that the work in Litchfield is expected to finish up by the end of the year. And then we still have the issue of well decommissioning and final resolution of some curb stops at undeveloped properties. But that's basically the same update that I gave you for last month. On the water supply well sampling matter, we did receive, since our last meeting, addendum 5 from Saint-Gobain, which is they update us with an addendum for the new properties where they're proposing to sample. The changes are that 100 additional, they're up to now 1,461 properties. So 100 additional letters were sent out. And in fact, 100 additional access agreements, not the same ones, came in during that same time period. So that means they're up to about 635 samples that have been collected from water supply wells. And again, depending on where you're located, that can represent only a 40 to 50% response rate. Hence the discussion we just had about, trying to get some additional notifications from town officials. So they will be sending second notices on a number of those. And to date, since our last meeting, they've added 61 additional properties. So they're up to a total of 386 properties that are receiving bottled water right now. And let's see, some of these things we've already discussed. We also are exploring with Saint-Gobain pretty much in real time here and their consultant options for implementing some alternate water solutions in certain locations where the data seems clear that that's not only necessary, but also there's a proximity of a water main that might allow for certain small areas and communities and neighborhoods, maybe trying to advance plans to construct additional water main and service connections sooner rather than waiting for the whole sort of package to be completed. So that is something that we're exploring, and we'll report on that in the coming week or coming meetings. And on bottled water, since our last meeting, there's been some additional concerns expressed by some folks in the community that bottled water deliveries weren't happening timely. We've had some communications with Saint-Gobain, and I know that they have been talking with their contractor Monadnock Water about that. It seems that part of the confusion is, or part of the problem is that some folks in the neighborhoods are happy to have a regular delivery scheduled. Others don't want that and want to do it on a call basis. And we understand that people have different needs and different wants, but it creates a bit of a problem for Monadnock because it means that, they try to, in trying to be efficient, they go to a community in a neighborhood and they want to deliver water. And what they really have is the folks who are on regular delivery, they can deliver, but then they got to come back maybe the next day because someone calls on a call basis and wants a delivery. So my understanding is that they're trying to work that out, and they think they'll be able to get a solution to sort of meet the needs of both of those kinds of requesters. But that, I think, has been part of the problem that's been created on the bottled water front. And that's pretty much what I have. I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Ms. Mesmer. Ms. Mesmer, did you have
So 300.
You're breaking up. We're not hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So just to be clear, Mr. Wimsatt, the 386 people are on private wells, are on bottled water, and that's a 61 resident increase since the new standards were implemented. Is that how I
No.
understand it? Okay.
No, that's 61 additional
Can you
residents.
clarify that then?
I'm sorry. That's 61 additional residents since last month's meeting.
So can you just tell me how many have been put on bottled water since the new standards were implemented then? Do you have an idea what that is?
I'm not sure how that 386 breaks out, but a large number of those are probably since the new standard became effective.
And those are all residents of Merrimack, or are they other towns?
No, they include Bedford and Merrimack, and Londonderry and Litchfield. But most of them are probably, well, no, they're distributed probably between Londonderry, Bedford, and Merrimack.
Bedford, Londonderry, and Merrimack.
And Litchfield. Right.
It's fewer in Litchfield because so many connections have been made in Litchfield.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other, Ms. Murphy?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm just wondering, Mr. Wimsatt, I noticed that St. Gobain has been included in the Flatley correspondence with DES. Do you know, are they going to be the tenant there, or do you have a sense of who that is?
I don't know the specific answer to that question, but I don't have any reason to believe that St. Gobain will be the tenant.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, next item on the, thank you very much, Mr. Wimsatt.
Representative Rung.
Yes.
Hi, can I just request, Mr. Wimsatt, if you could send me that report or send it to what you have written to the chair, just so I can make sure my minutes are good. Thank you.
I would be happy to do that.
Okay. Oh, one other point, Mr. Wimsatt, and this came up at the CAC meeting from Ms. Thomas, is it would be important information, in my opinion, when Golder is taking those samples to define or to note to identify if any of those homes have home filtration systems, because if they're sampling the tap, they may be sampling water that's already had PFAS removed, and it would misrepresent the existence of PFAS in that private well. Is it possible to ask St. Gobain to delineate which of those samples, or to ask the homeowner if those samples are from a home filtration system?
Yes, that's definitely part of the discussion that they're having. And, you know, that can be an issue. That's something that all of us who do this work are very well aware of as a concern. I can tell you that in many cases, certainly not all, but in many cases, when folks do put in a treatment system, they will have at least one tap outside plumbed separately so that they're not sort of paying to treat irrigation water. So in some cases, even if you do have in-home filtration for the whole house, there may be a spigot on the outside of the house that's actually not treated. And then that provides essentially a location to get a raw water sample from. But that question is definitely being asked, you know, as part of that sampling process.
Okay. If you're going to be in communication with St. Gobain, can you report at our next meeting how we are defining those water samples, if they are coming from an off filtration spigot or a spigot from a home filtration, or if there is no home filtration system? It would just make the data more valid.
You just want to know how they're handling that, or?
Well, I think, right. I mean, I haven't looked at their results from their testing, but assuming they have an address, they say water sampled external spigot or water sampled internal source to the house. If we could ask for more specific information about the point source for that sample, if it is coming off a home filtration system or if it's not coming off a home filtration system. There could be spigots outside that are a result of the home filtration system, that they're on the other side of that. Because
I'll check with our project manager and I'll report back on that issue.
yeah, it would be helpful because we're using that data essentially to map a plume, you know, to really understand the extent of the groundwater contamination. And if the water we're sampling has already had PFAS removed, it really doesn't have any integrity for the results that we're looking for. Anyway, that's just my thing. I think that's a really critical part to be able to identify that sample as whether it was pre or post filtration system. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to move on. Dr. Bush, do you have an update from DHHS?
Sure, yeah, and recognizing the time, I can be brief and we'll certainly follow up with the written comments for the notes. I want to let everyone know that DHHS released the Cancer Burden Report, a recent report. It's available on the Cancer Program's website, and I'll provide the link for the notes. The report includes state-level data, and I just want folks to recognize that there is a lag always in our surveillance data, so it only reports data from 2012 to 2016, but it is quite a comprehensive report. Also, you know, it's statewide data at this point, but I did want to let folks know that we have that new report out. I also wanted to let folks know that the Food Protection Program at DPHS here is undertaking rulemaking to require bottled water, either bottled or sold in New Hampshire, to meet the new 4 PFAS MCLs as well as the arsenic MCL. And so in terms of sort of timeline, I know that's relevant to an LSR, I think, being proposed. The plan is that we will move forward with rulemaking, you know, independent of, I think, that bill, and that generally that is something like a year-long process, but that the goal would be to implement that by December of 2021, so a year from now. Let's see, I wanted to let folks know that there's been just continued engagement across our 2 agencies here in Public Health and DES, and staff from both agencies recently participated in a risk communication training. And now a small work group is being convened to sort of continue to discuss best practices, and we'll be developing a guidance document really to guide our work going forward, which I think really speaks to some of the concerns of this commission and community members of how we engage with communities around environmental concerns. And then perhaps most notably, Representative Rung alluded to the fact, but as a new grantee of the CDC Agency for Toxic, ATSDR, sorry, I always forget the acronym, but CDC's funding for the Apple Tree program. We will be hosting a meeting next week. Hopefully some of you have already received an invitation or a public notice of that meeting. So Dr. John Alley, the toxicologist within DES, he's the Apple Tree program director, and he's been working with some local partners in Merrimack. So we've scheduled a presentation next week to just review the Apple Tree program and let folks know that we're here, sort of what that program is funded to do in terms of supporting site investigations as well as outreach and education. We will also have 2 representatives from ATSDR at that meeting able to give updates on the health consultations, which have not been completed yet, but are in the review stages, as well as any relevant work at Ps. I'm sure they'd be willing to give updates on sort of PFAS work in general. And I just want to also acknowledge that if the commission would like to schedule a separate presentation, we would certainly be more than happy to arrange something like that at a future meeting. But we, in an attempt to be responsive to community concerns, have sort of gone ahead and scheduled this meeting. And so I know that, as Representative Rung mentioned, she at least, and hopefully the plan was many of the representatives here who represent at least Merrimack were included in that initial distribution list. So I hope to see some or all of you next week at that meeting. And we have carved out a significant portion of time really to just have a conversation. And we're really approaching it as a listening session to just, again, share what new federal resources we have to support this type of work and better understand the concerns of the community.
Thank you, Dr. Bush. Would you be able to add Representative Mooney, Representative Healy, and Representative Cretion on that? Can those invitations be sent out to them as well?
we can certainly do that from our end, or I think you should also feel free to forward the invitation
Okay.
to anyone on this commission that you, that may be the best way to make sure that anyone on this commission is included if it's just maybe shared with the commission.
Okay, I'll send it to all the commission members. Thank you.
I think that might be best. But like I said, we're certainly recognizing short notice, also happy to set up a separate time to talk specifically with this commission.
Okay. All right. Anything else, Dr. Bush?
So those are all my updates.
Okay.
And just to say, I just want to acknowledge, obviously, we're in another peak of the epi curve here with our COVID-19. And as you might imagine, staff are very busy, and particularly in the public health laboratories as they respond. And so to Nancy Murphy's earlier point, our staff in the labs are very busy. Those samples are not going anywhere. I want to reassure you, it is probably the farthest thing from many of their minds at this point. So just to acknowledge the real public health crisis we're facing, and that as soon as that letter is shared with Crispine, I know it will be a topic of discussion, but that they currently have a lot on their plates.
Okay. Yes, I can imagine. Thank you. Any questions of Dr. Bush? Okay, we'll move on. The next item, it was new business. Mr. Wimsatt actually addressed a lot of that. I wanted to have a discussion about how do we resolve people who've been on bottled water long-term, and you know, how committed we can be to ensure that they have a permanent resolution. I don't think bottled water is a permanent solution for people. It's only providing drinking water, maybe cooking water, but it doesn't include any bathing, you know, water used for other hygiene. So I know you mentioned that, Mr. Wimsatt, in your conversations with St. Gobain about looking at the data and where the, municipal water could be extended. So I'm going to really pass over that right now, that conversation, but it was something that's on my mind to get permanent resolution to people. The next item, I'm just going to make a few comments. One is, this is the last meeting. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Costello.
Sorry, I need to go. I have a conflict.
That's okay. That's all right. Thank you.
Sorry.
And I'm sorry we're running late.
That's okay. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. To Ms. Harrington, did you have a question? Oh, okay.
I was just waving to her.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Just a couple quick comments. One, this is the last meeting that we're going to benefit from the Senate administration. They set up these Zoom calls on their license, send out the invitations. I want to take this time to just really express my deep gratitude to Alan Raff from Senate Administration Offices for all the work and the support he's given to us. He's really been a wonderful person to work with. Thank you very much, Alan, from all of us. I think I can speak on us. So thank you. And
thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it. You guys are doing great work, and I appreciate the work you guys are all doing, and I know you'll continue to keep doing it.
Oh, thank you very much. And best wishes, you know, in your future endeavors. This is actually Alan's last day as well. So we wish you all the best in your next steps.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And unfortunately, the New Hampshire House Administration Office is not really in a position to support the Zoom calls for us. Their first commitment is with standing committees and with the hundreds of LSRs that are coming forward. We just not going to fit time in their workload to be able to get these meetings set up. So I want to make a request of our agency partners, DES and DHHS, and probably, you know, I'm going to put you on the spot, Mr. Wimsatt, to explore the option if DES can host our meetings on a Zoom license or something regularly, because that's the only way we're going to be able to meet remotely, is to have an agency host us that would allow public access the way we do now. Maybe we can talk offline about this, but just to let you know right now, we don't have an option for our January meeting unless we have someone step forward to host us.
I'd certainly be happy to look into that and see what we can do.
Okay. And along those lines, I look at our next meeting would be January 8th. So if you can put that on your calendars, and being optimistic that DES can come through for us, you'll get more information, but pencil that date into your calendar. It would be the same time, 10 a.m. And that's a Friday. So we can, if you can look into that, Mr. Wimsatt, I would be eternally grateful to you. Thank you. And the next thing, and then as I mentioned earlier, we will at the next meeting revisit the organization for environmental health subcommittees. I'd also like us to have a discussion about the communication subcommittee. I think that's a really critical point now that Ms. Paradise, the work that she and Ms. Forty and Ms. Murphy has been done. We may need to give extra attention to that, particularly as we do want to expand the public information sessions. And then also at that meeting, as you know, I was elected chair at the last meeting, essentially to have somebody read the right to know script for today. If anybody with a fully staffed commission, which I expect will be in place by January 8th with the appointment of 2 new senators, if anybody does want to revisit the election of the chair, I would be happy to put that on the agenda. So if you do want to have another election for chair, considering that I might be regarded as just interim, I'd be happy to put that on the next agenda. And other than that, one other thing that I mentioned at that Community Advisory Council meeting with Sanko Bain earlier this week is we have documents that we use on that, their minutes in particular. And I notified them and they seemed fine with me putting those on our website as well. Even though they're not documents that are brought before our commission, I think people that may be going to our website to get information about this issue may find them helpful. So unless there's any disagreement of anybody on the commission, I will put those auxiliary information link on our website. Those would be documents that we don't address directly, but that they're pertinent to this topic. Ms. Forty, do you have a question?
I realize she's not here, but I just also wanted to recognize everything that Ava Hawks has done for the commission. I do think it would be good to have at least have it on the agenda for elections of chair and clerk, if seeing as there is turnover in different people, in case there's somebody else who might be interested.
Okay. All right, so I'll add that onto the agenda, the election of chair and clerk for the January meeting. If anybody does want to bring a nomination forward at that meeting, I think it might be helpful for you to have a conversation with whoever you want to nominate, just so they're not blindsided at the meeting. That would be great. Okay, then, is there anything else any member would like to discuss or bring forward at this time? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. It's 12:13.
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay.
You, Nancy.
Okay, great. We need to call the roll, so I'll ask the clerk to do that.
Yes, Mr. Ayotte?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Bandazian?
Yes.
Too many windows open. I apologize. Representative Bohm?
Yes.
Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Representative Crescian?
She had to leave, yeah.
Okay, and then I know Ms. Costello had to leave. I vote yes. Ms. Harrington?
Yes, and welcome new members.
Representative Healy?
Yes, thank you.
Ms. Messmer?
Yes.
Ms. Murphy?
Yes.
Ms. Paradise?
Yeah.
Representative Mooney?
Yes.
Representative Rung?
Yes.
Mr. Wimsatt?
Yes.
Representative Woods?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes.
Great, we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone, and sorry we went over our time.
Happy
Have a good
holidays.
holiday,
Happy
everyone.
holidays.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rosemary.
Thank you. You're welcome. Bye-bye.